is much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Monza Sleiman is the publisher of Think Tanks Monitor and the founder of the Center for American and Arab Studies right here in Washington, D.C. Joining us from Boston is author and Iranian affairs analyst Kaveh Afrasiabi. His upcoming book is entitled Trump and Iran, From Containment to Confrontation. John Sitilides is a geopolitical analyst and consultant to the U.S. State Department, and Sept Frantzman is a Middle East analyst with the Jerusalem Post and author of the new book, After ISIS, America, Iran, and the Struggle for the Middle East. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Sept Frantzman, let me start with you. Israel has been blamed for some of these attacks, but would neither confirm nor deny them. And I'm wondering, why does Israel keep that a secret? Why doesn't Israel come out and say, look, we're responsible for these attacks. We feel that our security is being endangered here. Why not come out? Why not just say what they were doing?
Well, I think Israel does take responsibility here and there. I mean, for instance, for the attack in Syria on August 24th, in which it had targeted killer drones. But the wider regional issue, for instance, Lebanon or Iraq, I think it's important that Israel maintain some ambiguity. I mean, these are, of course, sovereign states. So I think we can read into it what we want from what foreign media reports or satellite evidence, which is that we see the evidence, and sometimes it's clear that something was an airstrike, and sometimes it's more mysterious as to, okay, there was a munitions warehouse and it exploded, and it's not always clear who may have done it, and it's not always necessarily Israel. Israel is sometimes blamed for things it didn't do. But then usually years later we find out, for instance, like Israel said about Syria, that it has carried out more than 1,000 airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria, and Israel has admitted that. So I think it's a blend of ambiguity and also wanting to message to Israel's adversaries, because obviously it's important that Israel's enemies or adversaries understand, what Israel's concerns are.
And talking about that message, Seth, is the message one of deterrence, or is it Israel saying we're going to preempt any kind of attack that we may see coming from these countries?
Well, I think that Israel has certainly sent very clear messages, and that's through the Prime Minister or even the IDF statements about not allowing Iran or Shiite militias to entrench in Syria. Now, we've seen just today a new statement from the Arabic language spokesman of the IDF saying that Shiite militias should not be in Syria, and that's something Israel's been consistent on. Now, the question in terms of Lebanon, we've heard that they don't want precision missiles there. Now, in terms of Iraq, I think we've heard one or two statements from the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that say that Israel's willing to confront Iran basically anywhere in the region if it feels that there's a threat. And I think that Israel's very clear that precision-guided missiles or ballistic missiles, drones, those types of things, or air defense systems, for instance, can sometimes pose a direct threat to Israel. Now, people on the ground with small arms like militias, I think Israel doesn't say that that's a major concern. And actually, in the 1,000 airstrikes or so, very few actual people have been killed, which indicates that Israel's not interested in killing people. It's interested in destroying infrastructure or specific weapon systems.
Monza Sleiman, what do you make of what is going on in this shadow war? What do you think Israel's motives are?
Well, the war has been waged by Israel for a long time in many ways. Secretly, we're talking about whether cyber warfare and others, assassination also to high official or at least people who are working on a nuclear research and program, and also have like a freehand, like outlaw state act with its own law and putting its perceived security above everything and have a free hand in the entire region. Israel is like a armed forces with, or a country with only superior air force. In my opinion, without the, it used to be the intelligence and the Mossad. Of course, they're still very effective and they do work, but lately many exposed action embarrass them if they are embarrassed. But they rely on Air Force superiority, and the United States is maintaining that qualitative edge for Israel to really, under the guise of security and the threat to their security, into labeling people terrorists as they will, to conduct operation in the region. I think there is a new phase that we are entering, especially after the action that they took, the attack in Beirut and in Syria, but especially in Beirut, at Dahye, because Hezbollah did retaliate inside Israel,
Right.
inside the occupied territories, and it was reported by the RT reporter that even the Israeli, they abandoned their own base because they were afraid of what Hezbollah fighters will do.
All right, let me go to Kaveh Afrasiabi in Boston. Kaveh, there has been some reporting which says that Israel's motive behind these attacks is to prevent Iran supplying its allies in the region with precision-guided missiles, drones, and other kinds of sophisticated weapons. Doesn't Israel have a right to defend itself?
Well, for many decades, Israel has used grotesque logics to engage in blatant aggression against its neighbors, and now that has been extended to Iran and its allies. And Israel has been crossing some red lines recently by, violating the terms of peace and agreement with Hezbollah since 2006, attacking Iraq for the first time since 1981. And, if you look at the very important miscalculations by Mr. Netanyahu in terms of lobbying the White House to scuttle the Iran nuclear deal, which incidentally was fully and enthusiastically supported by the former Israeli Prime Minister, as well as many leading Israeli nuclear experts, as well as intelligence and defense officials in Israel, that sought the nuclear deal to be in the interest, national security interest of Israel, and Israel now supporting this maximum pressure campaign waged by the Trump administration, thinking that it can, just cheer on the sideline. Iran is pushing back against that, and Iran has formidable allies in the region. And if Israel's miscalculation was that it can insulate itself from the implications of its very offensive and disastrous policies, waging the seeds of war, now it's basically reaping what it's sowing. And it is not bringing security to Israel, rather increased insecurity.
John, are these offensive actions on the part of Israel, or are they defensive?
Anand, I'm going to reframe this discussion somewhat, because I want to posit that Israel is a very unique country in that it's been invaded or attacked 12 times, directly or through proxies, since it was founded in about 70 years ago by its neighbors. It's a very unique security problem that Israel faces, and it deals with it in a very unique way. At the same time, Iran, a radical Shia theocracy, has declared Israel to be the little Satan. The U.S., of course, is the great Satan in Tehran, and has put together a militia force of about 180,000 militiamen in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen, not only to pursue its larger hegemonic ambitions in the Middle East, but specifically to target Israel. And I think what Israel sees right now is major Iranian forces, spearheaded by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in Syria, near Israel's borders, putting together bases that your panelists mentioned before are being targeted with 1,000 strikes, if not more, over the last several years, mostly infrastructure and facilities and weapon caches, but also very much concerned about Hezbollah's growing rocket arsenal, about 130,000 rockets, going from crude rockets to potentially precision-guided rockets that will pose a major threat to Israel's population, not only in the northern region near the Lebanon border, but also in the triangle that includes Jerusalem and Tel Aviv.
Yeah, John, I'm wondering about the risks in this kind of policy, because as Kaveh Afrasiabi just told us, there could be a miscalculation here, which could lead to a wider conflict. That's the one thing. The other is that these three countries that we're talking about, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, are sovereign nations. When they're attacked, isn't that a violation of international law? Isn't it an act of war?
They're sovereign nations in that, to the degree that Syria is allowing Iran to station tens of thousands of militiamen with one specific ambition, to try to attack and potentially destroy Israel. Israel is going to take defensive measures. In Lebanon, one can argue that Hezbollah really controls the Lebanese government, the Lebanese parliament, and it's very difficult to conduct the kind of normal diplomatic business with the president of Lebanon that Israel might conduct with the leaders of other countries, because Hezbollah puts Lebanon in a very different situation than your typical sovereign.
But they do have sovereign rights to do that. Right.
They have sovereign rights, and every government has the sovereign right to defend its population and its borders against external threats.
Let me get your response to that assessment.
Well, Israel is outlaw state. They have their own action, and they justify it. And what I heard is some sort of justification to violate international law, to violate the sovereignty of every state. You cannot perceive any growing military or capacity of any country near Israel, because Israel has not ended the occupation, had not provided for the Palestinian their self-right for determination. It's been annexing land for Syria, occupied in 1967, and also the West Bank almost annexed and supported with a blank check by United States. So Israel has no right to interfere in any country.
Yeah, let me get back to the point, the question that I asked Kaveh Afrasabi. Israel is also a sovereign country, and doesn't it have a right to defend itself?
Well, I hope it, it is really a sovereign country. Any country who occupied other people's land and rule them unjustifiably need to examine itself and find a way to have really a constitution and with a defined border. It's the only country in the world that does not have the constitution or final border, because there is a serious problem. The occupation is the source of all problems.
Right.
That is being resolved, then you cannot really attack other countries, sovereign country, because you perceive that they are threatening you, and have a new law, preventive measure you can take at will.
Yeah.
If you are attacked, then you can respond. And the United States maintained Israel qualitative superiority with nuclear weapons. The only country in the Middle East now has nuclear weapons. And if Iran wants to have nuclear weapon, it's not declared officially that does not want to do that. But nobody is talking about eliminating weapon of mass destruction in the region.
All right, let me go to Seth Fransman. Seth, I mean, you've heard these views here. What do you make of it? The fact that Israel's actions are based on, as we heard, on grotesque logic, and that it's an outlaw state.
Look, I mean, I think it's a very complicated region. We're just coming off of, I think, 8 years of vicious civil war in Syria, in which about, I don't know, 10 million people were displaced, 500,000 were murdered or killed in the conflict there. And it's not clear that all these borders actually are as sovereign as people think. Hezbollah, by the way, played a major role in the Syrian conflict. There wasn't so long ago that ISIS occupied a third of Syria and a third of Iraq. In both of those cases, you have Shiite militias that are backed by Iran or the IRGC that are crossing borders and such things. So, I mean, I think that this idea that there's some sort of pure international law, maybe that works in a place like, some other fantasy world, but I think the Middle East is a very complex and imperfect region, and
it's not a real,
part of that region.
One moment,
Can I respond to that nonsense?
Okay, I'll get to you both in a moment. Go ahead, Seth.
That's
Finish
pure nonsense.
Look, I mean, I would just continue look, if Iran was transporting books for universities across all of these borders instead of ballistic missiles or precision guidance, I don't think Israel would care. But the fact is that according to Israel, there's precision-guided missiles, rockets, militias going across. And I think Israel has a right to fear that, because Hezbollah has said that its rockets can hit all of Israel. It's not like Hezbollah doesn't say exactly what it means.
All right. Seth,
So
I want to get something clarified here, Seth. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, recently spoke about this missile factory. Let's listen to what he had to say. Let's watch this.
We
possess no factories to produce precision-guided missiles. It's a lie, a pretext Netanyahu is using to attack. And as I said on many occasions, we have enough guided missiles for what we need, but not precision-guided missile factories.
So what do you make of that, Seth?
Well, it's interesting that he says that, well, we don't have precision-guided missile factories, but we have guided missiles. So it's kind of interesting that he admits one part of the elephant, but doesn't want to admit the rest of the elephant. So,
okay.
I mean, okay, that's fine. I think it's very clear what he said.
Monza, go ahead.
Yeah, I cannot believe that he's talking about the fantasy land. There's no fantasy land. People have sovereignty, and every state can invite anybody to come to their defense or station troops like any other country has the right, whether you call them militia, you call them whatever you call them. Syria has the right to have aid because 60 plus more country, they attack it and they send all terrorists to that country. So they have the right to use all what they can and to have, to invite other people to, like, whether the Iranian, the Russian, the Hezbollah. As far as consider Hezbollah as controlling the state of Lebanon, there is a state of Lebanon, there is parliament, there is government, there is a president, and Hezbollah is part officially in the sovereign government. And this is the official position of the government of Lebanon. And Hezbollah existence was not to be existed to begin with the credibility that he has now, if Israel did not attack and occupy Lebanon and for the first time attack and control and occupy the first Arab capital in the region.
Well, you know, the Israeli Prime Minister, Monza, Benjamin Netanyahu, he has been defending the country's actions. This is what he said. Let's watch this.
I defined three main goals for the IDF and the security forces in the following order. First of all, to stop and prevent the Iranian nuclear project. Second, to prevent Iran from supplying our enemies and its proxies, such as Hezbollah and others, with precision weapons that endanger us. And the third thing is to prevent Iran and its proxies from entrenching on our borders. In effect, we are operating against all of these goals, partly in an open manner and a considerable part covertly. We are determined to maintain the security of Israel.
You know, the fantasy, the real fantasy land, is to think that you could get security in with the continuation of occupation of the Palestinians. They built walls, they did everything, and every time they will come up with something under the guise of protecting Israel, and those are not. They need to wake up and find out in Gaza, where there is no even food could come to Gaza without the permission of Egypt and others. They were able to accelerate their weaponry and their missiles, and eventually there is no protection for Israel except to abide by the international law and provide for the Palestinian and end the occupation. That's the only way, and that's will go along the Iranian issue. The Iranian is aiding the Palestinian and the Lebanese and the Syrian because of the attacks, continuous attacks and occupation from Israeli.
Okay, John?
I think if one sees the kind of diplomatic activity we've seen in Riyadh, in Bahrain, in Abu Dhabi, and even in Oman, where these countries are opening up relations with Israel because they're very much concerned about Iran's very aggressive activities throughout the Middle East. The Palestinian issue is an important issue that needs to be resolved at some point in time, especially if the Palestinians can ever come to agreement as to what their future should be, and that's not happening anytime in the near future. But the Sunni Arab countries in the region are very much alarmed about Iran's activities in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon. They're turning a blind eye to Israel's sovereign right to defend itself against Iranian militia and against Hezbollah forces. So I don't see the Palestinian issue being very important right now in the context of Iranian aggression against Israel. And I don't think it will be anytime soon.
Kabe Sayabi, you've been waiting for some time. Go ahead and tell us what you wanted to tell us.
Well, you know, we've heard a lot today about Israel's right to defend itself. But, you know, there is a UN Resolution 242 that calls on Israel to withdraw from the lands it occupied in the 1967 war, and that includes the Golan Heights. So my question is, does the state of Syria have the right to defend its sovereignty over its parcel of land that was taken away forcibly by Israel through an act of war? Well, you know, if you ask the American guest right now, he would definitely say no, because the U.S. administration has conceded Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights in violation of international law. So, and the list goes on.
Okay.
We really need to have an impartial view of this. And what Israel is doing, as I said, is not in Israel's own best national security interest, because by egging Iran on and all these provocations and lobbying Washington to try to crush Iran's economy, etc., Iran will push back, and it's not bringing security for Israel, and Israel needs to reconsider its ill-advised policies under false pretexts.
Seth, the argument we're hearing here is that if Israel ends the occupation in the West Bank, if it ends the occupation on the Golan Heights, if it ends the blockade against Gaza, then all the other threats, all the other dangers will go away.
No, I think that was a talking point we've heard, since the 60s or 70s, and that's one view of the region, which is that all of the problems of the region somehow originate in Ramallah or Gaza. But I think we've seen that the vicious conflict in Syria, in which 500,000 people were killed, which is like 10 or 100 times more than were killed in all the wars that Israel's fought with the Palestinians. So that clearly there's much larger problems in the region. It would be great, obviously, if Gaza and the Palestinians and all of that could work itself out. But I think when we talk about the Iranian issue, it's a much larger issue, and I think it's clear that, of course, Iran would like to distract the region by saying that, no, the real problem is Israel. But the real problem is many other things in the region, including, for instance, Turkey's role in northern Syria, or what's happening in Libya, or what's happening in Yemen. There's many other issues taking place.
Okay.
Well, if
John?
we tried
I'll
just one time to solve the Palestinian issue and give them self-determination and end occupation, then we can talk about it. Countries, they got to compete for power, for influence in the region, whether Turkey, whether Iran, whether Israel, whether Egypt, Saudi Arabia. That's going to be there forever. But the issue, the root cause of all the issue that stems from even invading Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, terrorism, etc., it is it's an area that, because we did not solve the Palestinian issue, every problem is stemming from that. And you can present an argument to the Iranian by not having more influence in the region, because they're using the Palestinian. Let's assume that the Iranian are, for on their own sake, in their own empire in the region, they want to do that. You eliminate that from their agenda and then from their argument.
John.
I just want to offer two quick comments on one. First of all, it would be wonderful if everyone who seems to be concerned about the Palestinian issue would give 1/1000th of this concern to the situation between Morocco and Western Sahara, which is a very, very difficult occupation situation, and nobody in the Middle East who's always attacking Israel on the Palestinians ever concedes that we have a very difficult problem in Western Africa along the same lines. Secondly, on the Golan Heights issue, maybe it would have been wiser for the Syrian government to not invade Israel in 1967, sacrificing the land, and now demanding it back after it aggressively invaded Israel.
We're going to have to end it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.